Hi, and welcome to a new episode of Building Resilience. Today, I am welcoming Tiani Jones and Jurriaan Kamer for a very practical conversation on organizational resilience and competitive advantage. Tiani and Jurriaan are part of the Ready, an organizational design and transformation firm that helps companies like AirBnb, CitiBank, Johnson & Johnson, and Microsoft to change the way they work. Tune in to find out more about socio-technical systems, double and triple loop learning, a new operating systems for organizations, the power of visualization in solving organizational issues, strategic intent and extreme acceleration as drivers of competitive advantage. Through this podcast, we are bringing resilience research and practice closer to you. If you enjoy the content, don't forget to like, subscribe, and share your thoughts in the comment section below. Your views and your feedback are extremely important to the development of the podcast. Enjoy our conversation. Hi, Tiani. Hi, Jurriaan. And welcome to Building Resilience.
Hi.
Yeah.
I'm very, very thrilled to be hosting this conversation with the Ready.
Yeah, we're excited to be here.
Yeah, really excited.
Would you be okay to introduce yourselves first? And I'm more interested in how did you both get into supporting organizations transform and reinvent themselves, and what you like about it? It's not an easy job.
Yeah.
Ladies first.
Ladies first? Okay. I'll go first. I've spent about 20 years in engineering and technology. My background was in electrical engineering. And then I developed over time deep experience in software development, the Kanban method, Agile, and Lean UX. And my experience was mostly focused on innovation through experiments that informed product design. So that's where I first started, as I developed this experience, I started thinking around experimentation and learning, and then butting up against, system problems that made those things hard to do. And I've worked in so many different domains. So, mobile application development, educational software, IT, aerospace, like all these different domains. And most recently, a lot of transformation work in cyber-physical workspace. So there's physical things that are being built as well as the cyber software aspect, and sometimes really big systems, and transformation kind of being a really big topic there. And I've also worked on a framework for how do you observe the work system, and what kinds of things do you measure, and what kind of behaviors that promotes through measurement. And so all this work experience over time in engineering, I kind of moved into project management, which then moved into coaching, or agile coaching, or as agile delivery lead, then agile coaching. And again, I was running into these system problems, and that's where I was why are these things broken? And it distracted me. It distracted me from product development, from the thing we were supposed to be building, because I was seeing all these other things around in an organization. And I was there's problems here, here, and here, and this is not working, and these people aren't talking to each other, and it distracted me, and I want to start fixing those kind of problems. And so that's kind of how I got to this point where I work in transformation with organizations, helping them change and deliver and hopefully build cool things and serve their customers and that kind of thing.
I like the energy that you put into when you explain how you're working with organizations and how you see the problems popping up here and there, and then running to fix them.
Yeah.
It's funny to hear your story, Tiani, because it's actually very similar to mine. I also have a technology background. And so my interest in this work also came from doing agile work in IT, but then over time, really discovering that was not the bottleneck, right? The bottleneck wasn't the IT teams trying to deliver faster. The bottleneck was something else. It was decision-making coming from the top, not involving anyone. It was year-long budgeting cycles that everybody, just got mad of. It was all of those things. And I found myself in a room with the CEO of a big financial institution, and I was at that time not able to explain those challenges. He was like, that agile stuff in IT, that's great. You should keep doing that. And I was like, no. Actually, the problem is that the way the organizational operating system as a whole works is broken, and it's really not helping out on becoming faster and more responsive to the market. And that's when I started to look beyond the Agile toolbox, and I found lots of different things, lots of future of work practices, and eventually I also found the Ready, which I joined 4 years ago now.
So what do you do at the Ready, and how does the Ready help the customers, especially in this really complex world?
Yeah. So we are an organization design and transformation partner, right? So we work with teams and leaders of the teams to figure out and reinvent a new way of working for them that is more fit for purpose for them. And it's not only that; it's also based on self-managing principles, agility principles, promoting autonomy, transparency, and those things. Because we believe that is what the future of work is based on. So we've taken inspiration from the most innovative and radical organizations out there, and we use the practices that we see working there well, and we try to find the best way to solve the tensions in the client organizations. But more importantly, we're trying to build the capability and the capacity in the organizations that we work for them to continuously evolve their way of working. So building the muscle of a continuous change loop that can continue when we're gone.
So I can imagine that you work with customers that are at different stages of evolution. So not all of them are ready to go fully flexible, fully transparent, fully agile, fully lean.
True.
Yeah, I definitely some of my client work has been in, organization that, it goes back into, 60 years. It's a conglomerate with multiple acquisitions and kind of very old school engineering practices. And so for this kind of organization, where a lot of times working with parts of it, like business units, and that business unit kind of runs as a business, and that's a good place to start. And we're looking at a lot of the work I'm currently doing is working with leadership teams and helping them with their strategies. So a lot of times they have a lot of work in progress, a lot of initiatives. The organization is it's just huge. And they're hemmed in and they're locked in and so busy. And what they find is that a simple thing like, let's visualize what we're currently doing. And then they say, wait, we're doing too much. Okay, let's talk about what's our strategic intent and let's map that out. And so we've been leading some mapping activities with the leadership team in one particular business unit, trying to do business transformation. And they map out their strategic intent and they come up with these clear initiatives. And then they start asking, oh, wait a second. We have a lot of other things we're doing it's work that's not mapped to our strategic intent in these initiatives. Oh, and also there's some things we're doing in our ways of working in our practices that we can't actually pursue this capability that we want to. So the work begins first. What can we unlock and what can we change? And so that to put ourselves in a position to now be able to pursue that capability, building it or partnering with someone else, whatever the case may be, depending on where it is in the landscape, from innovation to something that just kind of keeps cost of doing business. So yeah, that's part of the work as well. And that's what I've found really interesting in recent conversations I've been in with these leadership teams.
I was even wondering, what's their purpose of reinvention? Is there a pattern that you see?
Well, it's a good question. If everybody wants to go faster, get rid of bureaucracy, make better decisions, all those things. So the problems are often very common across the organizations. How far they want to go with that is depends on the organization. So I think many organizations that are more traditional suffer from the same problems, and they see that they want to go on and fix that. And I think that's mostly because all human beings more or less have the same kind of needs when they show up in the workplace, and many organizations actually use the same kind of management hierarchy framework that is not serving them at the moment.
An interesting thing that I've been working with my team with our client project is identifying some patterns and what are the anti-patterns, but what are the good patterns that we want to follow and what the principles that are behind those. And so I think the thing that has made me kind of realize is that there's kind of a lot of pragmatic action in corporations. So I have a goal and I want to get a result. So I'm going to do something and I'm going to try to get that result. And then I'm just going to keep in this kind of single loop. And there's less of double loop thinking, less investment, so that the companies overinvest in pragmatic, sort of like single loop thinking, and less investment in double loop, which is more, I have a goal, I'm going to take some action now, I'm going to see what happened and challenge my assumptions that led me to the actions in the first place, and then tweak that. And then if you go into the next loop from that, which is like a triple loop learning, which is more, okay, understanding my work system as a whole, like why is it the way it is? What is it disposed to do? What skills do we have at our disposal? How easily can we move skills around? What is our purpose? Like these kind of deeper questions, there's like less investment in that. And that's kind of a pattern, if it's a really high level pattern, but it then branches down into a bunch of different things that are opportunities for different types of conversations with the teams.
So would that be an example of your work and what you're trying to do to get them to this triple loop learning and reflection and finding opportunities through this?
Definitely. Our work definitely involves like surfacing the idea that the work system is a connected system. There's a white paper I reference a lot that talks about what the socio-technical system is. So it's not just like a technical system, but there's a socio aspect to it. So you have your whole entire organization. You have like the primary work system. Think of that as like the value stream. So from an idea to something's in a customer or user's hands, that whole stream. And then you have like social phenomena and social connection that happens. And all of that makes up the system. And there are all the behaviors that happen and all the things that you do. And so starting to introduce those topics in a way that's palatable and consumable and makes sense in their context is definitely part of the work, because that's when you start to think of, oh, well, we do this thing, and what if we change one aspect of how we work, we're doing and behaving in a slightly different way, and now we can see what shifting towards the purpose that we have and the outcomes that we want. So yeah, that's every day. Some aspect of that is part of the work.
I was even thinking when you said palatable, this is a podcast about resilience. And I've used this word quite often. And when you talk to academics, everyone can make sense of it. Everyone has a definition of resilience. But I find it that when I work with customers or with just normal people, like usual people that don't do research, it doesn't really say much, or it's really interpreted more as a resistance, right? Robustness, rather than it's supposed to be interpreted. So I was even wondering, do you have resilience as a purpose of your transformation, or do you use different kinds of terminology for this?
Yeah, I think so. We don't use resilience that often as a way of describing our work. I would say it's a property, it's a quality. A lot of clients actually ask about agility, which is definitely related. It's not fully the same, but it's about being able to move fast on your feet and to change around. Unfortunately, that word is also loaded with a lot of practices. It's associated with one or two practices, and there's different forms and shapes of it, and not all of it is aligned with what we think should be done. But yeah, I think if you talk about improving the organization, it really depends. Like, do you want to be more resilient, or do you want to be more, I don't know, you want to be more responsive to the market, or what is it? Do you want to just have more quality in your work, or do you want to have more fun in the workplace? Like, all of those things could be true. So we don't necessarily think only about resiliency. The two things we do work a lot around, though, is the two mindsets that's also described in our book, which is we want organizations that are people positive, right? That treat people with respect and trust that they can make the decisions, and they usually would do the right thing if you give them the right environment. And the second one is complexity consciousness. And we talked about that a lot. Like Tiani talked about the looping and the double loop learning. Like, teach people new skills or new ways of working that help them operate in a complex environment. So very often we use plan-driven project management, for example, to do something. Like let's sit down and create a plan that's going to get us in the next 2 to 3 or maybe 5 years, and then define the milestones and see where we are on the Gantt chart. But obviously, like, reality is not based on complicated systems. It's a complex system, which means you do need to just try things, learn from that, reflect, and then try something else to get to where you want to go. So those two mindsets, people positivity and complexity consciousness, is what we want to instill. And that is both geared towards resilience.
For sure. And I'm quite curious, how do your customers see the future of work? Do they express this? Do they have the same view as you, or do you have to bring them along with you?
Customers that we're working with, or the team that I'm on, the future of work conversation, it's interesting because they're talking a lot about agility, which is not future. They use that word a lot, but they do talk a lot about the they've started to talk more as we've helped them with the understanding strategic intent. What are those kinds of things that are, they have more of a language about what are the things from their own business perspective that are kind of, could be differentiators or like innovative, like kind of a market, give you a competitive advantage. They have a little bit of language around that. They have a language around the competitors, what they're doing that seems like next level. In terms of like how they work, there's conversation about trying to envision kind of a future state. And a lot of times we're trying to back them away from envisioning a grand future state because of complexity, you don't actually know what that, you don't know what the org chart's going to look like and how the teams are always all going to line up and what the market and the business is going to be. But if you can start talking about multiple transitions and build the muscle to make multiple transitions to better now states over and over and over, and that being what the future is, that kind of going back to the word about resilience, that's I think that's kind of how the conversation has been changing. Another thing is that what I've seen from a lot of the teams are kind of really rooted and feel comfort in these practices that feel like they're industry standard and that have certain rigor and prescriptiveness to them. And what's been changing is understanding that there is rigor in applying patterns and having options that are not prescriptive. So you take a moment to understand what is the right thing to do in this context and what are the practices and the patterns that we should apply. And that's kind of now becoming part of the language in terms of future of work, less prescription and equating that to rigor. And now saying, well, we can have rigor in how we do work, but there could be more, can be options, and it can be done in a different way where we're actually like increasing learning. Because some of those prescriptive ways of working don't increase learning. And so I think that's kind of some of the things that come to mind when you pose that question.
Actually, to build on that, right? So the challenge I see with the term the future of work is that people immediately think about, oh, it's not now. It's going to be somewhere in the future.
Right.
So we can definitely dream about what the future could be, and all that stuff is nice. But the question, we try to ask teams is like, what is holding you back now from doing the best of your work? What is holding you back now from doing the best work of your lives now? So, right. Let's talk about what you're currently facing at this point in time, and let's look at all the options of what we might do about that. And that is basically the ongoing journey. Like, start asking that question. People will have an answer. You bring in work practices that are modern. They're not future. They're modern. They're novel. They're not rooted in the same traditional principles of top-down hierarchy, but they're based on autonomy and all those things. So let's try some novel practices to solve some of your current tensions, and then go through that loop. And that over time, it starts small, you go bigger, and that scales, and that spreads virally in a good way. That's more the approach than getting them in a mindset of the future of work.
Maybe that's why a better term would be the evolution of work rather than the future of work. I face the same kind of issues at an individual level. Because when you're talking about, hey, what's coming in the future of work and how jobs will be automated and so on, everyone thinks it's not today, it's tomorrow. It's somewhere in the past. It will not affect me.
Yeah, you hope so. I mean, there's definitely, it's definitely useful to think through different scenarios that might play out in the future, right? That's more scenario planning. but then don't use that as a way to evolve. Like we often use the term adjacent possible, right? So what is the one thing that's right next to where we are now that actually could improve a little bit? And if you start doing the habit of continuously looking for ways to be better, then over time you can actually unlock the bigger moves.
And this is a question for both of you. Do you think that organizations and teams and individuals need a certain basis, whether that's competency, whether those are various skills or behaviors from which they can start to transform to better states? Do they need a package of tools to start with so they can do that work? Or assets?
Yeah, so yes and no. The problem is every organization in every context is different. So there's no way to know upfront what that tool package need to be. However, with the introduction of the operating system canvas in the Brave New Workbook, we have identified 12 different fields of where we can actually make improvements and make changes, where we can innovate our way of working. And the obvious places are meetings, right? How do you come together as a team and talk to each other? And do you just sit in front of a Zoom meeting or in a sided table and just talk for an hour and hopefully that will help? No, obviously not. We teach people how to design intentional meetings, to facilitate them properly, to structure them properly, to make them fit for purpose. So that is definitely one of the basic skills that are useful in most places. But what specific meeting practice? Well, I guess that depends. But there is definitely some practices that we found useful in almost all organizations that we talk and write about as well. The other thing that comes to mind quickly is about, for example, authority, decision making. How do we make a decision? Like if you have good meetings and you have good decision making, then you're already on your way, right? And then if the purpose is clear too of what we're trying to achieve, then I guess some of the basics are there. Does that get your answer? I'm not. Did I answer it? I don't know.
Yeah, for sure. But I do have a question. Why do you call it an operating system?
Yeah. What's your take on that, Tiani?
Why use this name?
I mean, it's the foundation of how things work, how things move, how things get done. The first thing that comes to mind is when I talked about like the socio-technical system. There's like, if you think of it as like a computer operating system, there's like elements that are invisible. Do you know what I mean? That there's things that work, that elements that are invisible, some things that are not knowable readily to the user of the system, but it's not unknowable. There's the complicated engineering behind it. But then if you talk about when you're adding in the people element of the system, there's the complexity level the complexity aspect that gets involved. So those are the things that can be unknowable, things that can emerge that you may not be able to predict, and so I think for me, that's what I think about when we use the term operating system.
I like about it the fact that it implies somehow the basis of change, right? So it's a starting point, but it's also what should keep the system running. And it's somewhere behind, right? You don't really see that it's running. You just feel that it's there, and it's somehow directing behavior and directing the things that you do without actually noticing that it's there, without disturbing you, without adding more stress to the system.
It actually enables the work to happen, right? And you it's a good segue into another point about the operating system, is that often we haven't defined it. So, and you discover it when you're in an organization, right? So you're in a place, and then the culture or whatever it is, the behavior is diverging to a certain type of decision making, a certain type of talking to each other, a certain type of how we actually do things around here. And our work is really, first of all, to make the operating system visible. So let's talk about how we have meetings. Let's talk about how we make decisions. Let's talk about how we set our strategy, for example, and then also reflecting on it, like which of the elements of the operating system are going well, and which of them can be redefined, refactored, improved. So it's really touching into a layer that people often don't think about. And so we make that layer visible and then give people the tools to evolve it.
there was a team I was working with. They were rocket scientists, and they were experimenting with a new material for an engine fan blade. And they had this, a detailed Gantt chart months and months out, how they were going to do this. And they wanted to get funding. They were going to do a presentation to some leadership. And there was a person kind of like over this initiative about trying to do things in new ways. And so he came to us and said, well, the team's got this kind of a traditional approach. They've got this like all these detailed steps laid out over a year or two. And it just doesn't, can we help them like plan this work differently and maybe make a different presentation for the fund to get funding? So we did a workshop with the team, and we, had them out, like, what's the first thing you want to know? First thing we want to know is it feasible to do this fan in blade, this engine fan blade in this material? Okay, what do you know so far? Well, what we know is we've done these simulations and these models. And according to these models, it's feasible, but we have to do we have to try this, but how could we do this? So I said, the first question you want to ask, what's the first question you would ask? The first test you would do? They said, well, the first test we would do would be manufacture a version of it and stick it on a motor in this like test lab and spin it at the power requirement that it needs to be. I said, okay, write that down. Where you're going to test it, how you're going to test it, where you're going to manufacture it, and who's the team that you need to do that, to run that test. So they wrote it down. I said, okay, if that goes well, based on your initial calculations and what you think, what would be your second test? Said, well, the second test is that we'd put a housing around it as if it was like in a plane. And there's a couple of calculations that they would change, like the next level. I said, okay, call that out. So I say, test number 1 is this, test number 2 is this. Here's what the housing would be, and then what's the difference and what you're expecting. And then what would test number 3? And by test number 3, they would have proved. And they said, okay, test number 3 would be this. We'd refine the blades, get them milled down perfectly in the housing, at this power requirement, at this speed, all this kind of thing. And they were able to present this as a series of tests and hypotheses as their plan, get funding, and then they started doing the work. And the thing that was amazing to me is that I have these 30-year rocket scientists asking me questions about about work and the future of work, and or about different options that they could do, how they could do their work differently. And so what did the things that they did? They visualized their work. The team got in a room together, put everything in this like a Kanban, but it was in an Excel spreadsheet, and they had a system for how they updated it. They didn't have a fancy tool. They didn't have it on a wall. They had it in this spreadsheet. Okay, that was fine. Then they met frequently as a group. They looked for opportunities to pair up rather than do solo work. They had frequent demos and iterations of demos in the actual lab and brought the leadership in and the customers and stakeholders to watch the demo. And they were able to do this in record time. And they realized along the way that there were different systematic things that they were able to unblock. Like, wait a second, there's only one person in this entire research facility that knows how to run the lab. Why is that? Like, he's overbooked for the next 4 months and we have multiple tests to do. So they had one person follow him and start documenting the lab procedures, test procedures. And then they put that in a place where everyone could use it. And so now multiple people could now use the lab and set it up and take some of the burden off of that person. And then they learned about other things around how they work and different skills and expertise that they needed to be able to pull from the organization in. And that was where they started to surface, like, oh, there's other things that are kind of affecting our work. And they were able to take that to leadership and start swarming around ways to change that. And so I think the thing that brought the reason why I wanted to go into that story is just that first you had to start, but they started with like some kind of like constrained experiment and some purpose. And then as the team was able to start that work, they were able to take control of and unblock issues themselves. And then once we were able to tell that story, it kind of brought it to life for people who couldn't really see it before. Oh, that's what it means. The team sees a problem and they're able to unblock it for themselves so that they can do the work that we're here to do. So I think that kind of illustrates this idea of like what's needed and what are the tools and what's that experience like for change.
Thanks for sharing that. Do you feel that they are able to reutilize this kind of behavior and this kind of mindset and thinking once you're going away from there?
in this case, the team kept working and started showing other people how to do that. But they had 12 other teams that they wanted to now. They said, we want to duplicate that. What was the thing? What was the secret? And there really was no secret. It was like the team got into a room, the team planned the work, the team came up with a system for getting the work done, the team worked directly with stakeholders and customers, the team unblocked. And if there was something that they needed help with, they knew who could support them and unblock them from a system and from a leadership perspective. And it was kind of like, that's it. So if every team can know how to do that, and can start doing that, then I think we'll be on our way. So yeah, that was how it grew from there.
To build on that a little, right? So what Tiani just illustrated is how that change will spread throughout the organization, hopefully, right? So start with a couple of teams that we coach and help work in a different way, in a better way, and that team is energized, that's super engaged. Right? If you walk into that corner of the office, if it's a physical space, you'll feel the energy is different, right? You'll feel people that are engaged and motivated to do this themselves, because now they have the autonomy to do so, and they're enabled to be that way. And usually, what happens, a couple of other teams, they see that, and leaders look at it and say, "Hey, I want that too," and then that's how it spreads. So it's really pull instead of push. So this very counter the traditional way of doing change management, which is like, we're going to centralize a plan, how we're going to change the culture. Let's make a plan, a roadmap of what that looks like, and then we're going to roll out the change. We're going to push this change to people. We're going to communicate a lot. We're going to tell them what to do, and that will change the culture. Well, this type of change is really pull-based. So it's based on building a movement, building enthusiasm, and that automatically over time eats up. And then stuff that doesn't work in that specific culture will also not be scaled, right? So it's really about scaling the things that actually work for that specific culture, for that specific problem space.
You always use the word coaching and not consulting, not anything else. Why is that?
I mean, it is consulting in some way, but not in the traditional sense, right? So we are a consultancy. We provide services to our clients, but the way we do it is through teaching and coaching, I would say. So not only coaching, right? Pure coaching is literally asking people questions so they can find their own solutions. But we do more than that, of course. We also do teaching of new practice. We teach people how to learn it, how to do it, and then when people are doing it, then we will coach them in the moment and teach them like, hey, you did it this way. I think you should consider it that way. And then the consulting bit is more about being a thinking partner for how to scale a change, how to structure a change program, how to what problem spaces to tap into. That's more advice giving. Like traditional consultancies will for example, a traditional consultancy might tell you more about what the content of your strategy is, for example, and that's not a space we go to. We teach you how to create your strategy, how to create moments of participation, so more people in the organization help out to create it. So we teach practices of how to do that, but we don't tell you what the answer is. So like Tiani was impressed by the rocket scientist, and I would be equally impressed if I would be working with that team. But it's like, I'm doing my work and they're doing their work. And but I definitely felt I was when I worked with some boardrooms, I definitely had moments where it was like, oh my God, they just made a 100 million euro decision using my decision framework. And I'm like, whoa, right? And that's normal for them. It's not normal for me. But again, like they learn from me and I learn from them.
You talk in Formula X about the speed of transformation, and it's very fascinating because this is something my partner tries to teach me about biking and even driving cars, that high speed provides more control, that you should actually be speedier than your context to be able to be resilient. So talk to me about that. How does that come about?
So Formula X, the subtitle is How to Reach Extreme Acceleration in Your Organization. And me and my co-author have used metaphors and ideas from Formula One racing teams and how they organize from the inside. So F1 teams are, they not only they build fast cars, they also change them and improve them at an extremely high pace, right? We're talking about over 1,000 innovations per week on these cars. And they need to do it because otherwise, if they stop doing it, their competitors will immediately take over. So speed is important, although the book also makes another point that it's more about acceleration than speed, right? So if you're able to have constant acceleration, then there's an exponential growth in speed, and basically time will solve all your problems. So the speed metaphor is more about, can we build an organization that is continuously looking to find marginal gains of where to improve? There's lots of talk about the practices that you can use for that. But speed itself is relative, right? If you don't need to be faster than the market, right? If you're too fast for the market, people are like, I just cannot follow you, right? The customer really cannot follow what you're doing. Like if you bring a new product to them every 5 seconds, they're going to go crazy. But if that's what the market demands, or your competitors are able to kind of capture the needs of the customer in a faster way than you, or respond to those needs faster than you, then you're out of business quite quickly.
The thing that we've been talking a lot with leadership teams is, because especially in the cyber physical development, if you talk about in aerospace, engine design, that kind of thing, there's a desire for them the desire that they have is to build those things faster, because design and build for like an engine could take 5 years, maybe something like that. And so the conversation we've tried to shift it to how to become and work more effectively. So what are the effective, sometimes using like DevOps principles, and or there's doing a lot of experimentation with this book and this like technique called team topologies, how you organize teams around the value streams and how you pull in expertise, what teams run the platform type activities, all of that. And so changing the conversation to how do we work effectively, it's kind of like smooth things out and then tune it and move to more efficient ways of being more efficient, being faster. So that's another thing that I think is interesting. When leaders go first to we want to measure efficiency and we want to measure speed, we want to measure those kinds of things, also bringing in effectiveness, because that kind of links to the tools and the processes, the competencies, kind of like part of your question, people. And I think that's actually when you're able to ask those questions and make changes around effectiveness, that kind of, for me, represents like a little higher level of maturity in an organization towards resilience than just fast without kind of looking back and saying, can we even go fast? What is fast enough? What is our system disposed to do right now? What are the skills that we have? What are the tools that we have? What are, how do we actually do business? And kind of asking these probing questions in a way is kind of how we've been trying to move the conversation.
One other thing that was interesting was applying physics laws in organizations. So how do you make this understood and practical in daily client work and not talk the actual language of Newton?
So my co-author is a physics professor, so he had some good words about that. And we used some metaphor, like we talked about speed, we talked about acceleration a little bit. You can also talk about mass and inertia, right? So if you make something really big, it also becomes really slow, or it can turn slower, right? If you are in a certain direction and it has a certain speed, because it's big, you cannot just change it easily. It's like a big oil tanker. So you can use it in the language and explaining some of the concepts. My favorite is actually talking about organizational drag. So if you have a racing car, you have a certain amount of drag on aerodynamic drag that will actually create downforce. So you need some of that to be able to stick the wheels on the ground. But more often than not, organizations and teams that are in those organizations, they suffer from a lot of drag around them. So and most of it is unnecessary, right? Over time, humans are really good at adding things, and they're not so good at subtracting things. And the best way to notice and to discover this, if you open a random kitchen drawer, right? You see that there's a huge amount of stuff in there that you actually bought, but you never threw away because you never use it. Like organizations are quite similar, right? So we have compounded all these rules and processes that were invented for a certain reason, maybe because a mistake happened and somebody at the top said, this may never happen again. Right now, okay, now you have another approval process. When do you actually reevaluate those things? When do you figure out, like, is this still serving us? Can we throw it away? What was actually the original intent of doing this, right? People don't forget. It's just like, well, there's this process, and I think we do this because some kind of department does it. And we go talk to that department, they're like, yeah, I actually don't know. I thought it was for someone else. And yeah, we spend like 40 hours a month on a certain report that we're sending to a leadership team. And when you talk to the leadership team, they're like, oh, that email, yeah, I just always throw it away because it makes no sense to me, right? So it's really about finding the places in the organization that has useless work, that has waste, that slows team down, and really start asking the question, every team, like, what is holding you back? What's in the way of going faster or doing your work better? And then reducing those elements as much as possible. At the same time, the thing we should keep thinking about is enabling constraints, right? It's not all about removing rules, right? The only reason we can go fast, for example, on the racing track or on the road, is because we have good brakes, right? And we have good safety features, and we have good seat belts, and we have a helmet, and we have a speed limit on the highway, and we all drive in the same direction, right? Those are some constraints that are enabling speed, and that's also important to consider that factor.
Yeah, the something that you were talking about that came to mind was another group that I worked with that they were questioning. They were doing what was it? They were doing commercial refrigeration, like big applications in commercial refrigeration, and they had but they were part like under this aerospace company, so they had adopted all of the same approvals, like technology readiness level that came from NASA. All these approval gates where a board gets together and looks at what you're doing and gives you the thumbs up or not, sort of part of a quality check. And this group was kind of not being able to respond to their customer needs, and they had a lot of competitors that were coming up and able to build refrigeration a lot faster. And so they started examining why do we do this? And because of the structure of the organization, they went through this negotiation kind of to untangle this approval process, because what they wanted to do is put early prototypes of these refrigeration in a customer app setting. So whether they can get feedback like, okay, how do the doors work, and how is the cooling, and these hinges, and how does it fit into your space, and human factors of walking around and people having to reach in and into the cooler. Can they get the product out, whatever it happens to be, if it's meat or ice cream or whatever it happens to be. And so, but this approval and gating process that had been like adopted over many years was stopping them from putting just a prototype in the user and the customer's environment. So they were able to negotiate out that and untangle that and have this kind of like approval light, which is basically just presenting their plan and how they want to do things, getting tips from the business, or having them ask questions. And they were able to get these early prototypes in. And what they were able to do is by far solve the customer's problem. Like the product was much better than all the competitors. Now, but the next thing that they found was it is still too expensive. Like, okay, now much better product, much higher quality, solves their needs, a little bit too expensive. Okay, next round of experimentation, so let's make it cheaper. And so it's this kind of thing that I saw was like that. And then the things that they had that set them up to be able to do this was they had a coach that was like coaching teams in agility and different ways of working. So that's on the shop floor. And the interesting thing that I found was the leader, his obsession was, how do I unblock all the teams out there on the floor doing this work so that they can get product in the customer hand faster and that we can make it less expensive? That was all of his work. He wasn't worried about status reports. He wasn't worried about, micromanaging. All he was doing was, I'm unblocking my teams, and this is the mission. And it was very, very clear. And so he brought in expertise as they needed it. How to reduce variation in the parts and kind of like lower that variation such that they could have more modular parts that they can, a fewer selection of parts they can put together and get a product out. all these different things that he was doing to enable the team, enable getting product into the customer's hand, and then working on that negotiation. And that was a process of iteration that they had to do that. And I think that was kind of interesting. That came to mind when Jurriaan was just talking about looking at these things that are causing waste and then stepping through them bit by bit in service of the goal that you want to achieve. And seeing that in action is really great.
I would say that the speed at which you can do that is what for me defines resilience, right? If you're able to improve real quick, or you're able to change real quick because the thing you're doing is no longer working, that is resilient. Because then if the market changes, the need changes, a new competitor comes in, new technology comes in, like how fast can you adopt it and use it to your benefit and respond to that? That actually creates an organization that has longevity and is therefore also resilient.
For sure. If you were to think of maybe 3, 4, 5 key things that you would advise anyone in organizations to start thinking about or put in practice, because you've seen the patterns and you've seen that they are sparks that they can lead to bigger change or better change or more continuous change, what would those be?
First thing that comes to mind is to make it a habit to reflect more often, to hold space in the team, in your team, in the leadership team, or wherever, that to hold space for reflection and for making a deliberate improvements, basically. So and that should not be something that is, let's do it once every quarter or let's find some time on the schedule somewhere and it takes a while. No, that should be a recurring pattern to install, something that is in your operating rhythm, that's always there. It's non-negotiable. We always, on a cadence, on a rhythm, look back and figure out, like, what did we actually do? Were we successful? Were we not successful? And what can we do to change that? That's something that is often, especially in Western companies, is not very valued for some reason. It feels like it's a waste of time, or I don't know. It's not the work. We should be just driving and going faster instead of working smarter, which that actually goes to. What would you add to that, Tiani?
We've been using this idea of operational tests with the leadership we're working with. So one thing that I think is really important that I've seen work is workflow visibility. It seems kind of granular, but leadership teams, if a leadership team has different type of work to do, if product teams and whoever the teams are, if their work, a lot of times in knowledge work, the workflow is not visible. It's not like you can go to the shop floor and see a car being put together. You have they call the Gemba, and you have a Kanban that tells you where there's a problem, a sign or a signal, and you can go over there and swarm on that problem. With knowledge work, it's invisible. So workflow visibility is really, really important. Visualize the work. Find the hidden work, put everything on the table. That's, I think, one thing I've seen that's super effective, because then you can start reasoning, why are we doing all these things? What are the most important things? Do these match to our strategic intent? What can we subordinate? What things can we should we bring forward that we're not doing? And then it branches into, what are the skills that we need to get this work done? How do we grow the skills in our organization? Asking those kinds of questions. What I would add, I think they touch so many different parts of business and work, and they're things anyone can, any company can start asking those questions and start thinking about, right now, how to visualize work, and then probing questions around that work, from the skills and the people to the strategy to the tools and techniques and all of that. A lot of power in those too, I think.
The other thing I would add is it's quite similar or a little different angle. I think what leaders that are responsible for a certain part of the organization should realize more is that their job is to work on the system and not in the system.
Yes.
So it's another way of saying the same thing that Tiani was saying, their job is really to create the environment where the work happens and where the system actually evolves to a better state all the time, instead of them being very reactive and overloaded, and they need to make all the decisions and they need to be involved in everything, and that results into micromanagement and lots of other dysfunction. So let them work on the system, so actually the system builds other leaders and also builds better outcomes automatically every time. And the other one is about also what you hinted to a little bit, is the intent, the strategic intent. We very often get into organizations where people are busy and overloaded, and the question is always like, what is really essential here? So it comes from a book called Essentialism, which we really like, by Greg McKeown. And he talks about this, what is essential? So are you able to define the 3 to 5, the 5 or 6 or maybe 8 things that are essential, and what are the outcomes you're really aiming for in the next 3 years, for example? And that forces people to think, that forces people to think about what is the real thing we want to get to. And if it's not on that list, it's not essential. So we should stop doing that work. So it's really about eliminating things that you actually not that you don't need to do, you don't want to do, but we just keep doing them because we're not intentional about it.
Yeah, that's funny you say that, because we just had a conversation with some leaders this past week that were saying, we're really good at starting things. We start things and start things and start. That lean principle of like stop starting and start finishing. And the only way you can do that is by lowering your whip, visualizing all the work, lowering the work in progress. But then really, like you said, it's like mapping to what's essential, mapping to the purpose of the organization can really help. And the thing is, if you can encapsulate that into something that all the teams across the organization can understand, they can make decisions in favor of, they're not going to start working on things that don't map to where the direction and the vision and the strategic intent. They'll be able to be in that empowers them to then say, oh, these things are really important for the direction of where we're going. So this is, they know what to do. They know what things to work on, what things not to work on. And then kind of like they can take ownership of the techniques that they apply then in service of that mission.
Jurriaan, Tiani, thank you so much for today, and thank you for your time. For those that want to reach out to you,
well, they go to theready.com, sign up for our newsletter, or pick up a copy of Brave New Work and email us. There's an email on our website and a contact form. And also you can find us on Twitter. I'm at Jurriaan Kamer, Twitter, LinkedIn. That's where you can find me.
Tiani, I'm Tiani Original. I think there's an underscore in there. But if you search that, you'll find me.
Perfect. I'll make sure to add them in the description as well for YouTube and also for the other podcast players.
Awesome. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you both so much.